Most people do not leave work because they run out of strength. They leave work because one day the numbers finally tell the truth, and the truth is often much earlier than their habits are willing to admit. There is a quiet turning point that shows up for a great many people around 57, 58, 59. They open a 401k statement, an IRA statement, a brokerage screen, and for the first time the question in their head changes. It is no longer, will I ever have enough? It becomes, why am I still carrying my life the way I did 20 years ago, and do I actually need to? That is the question most people are not trained to answer. They know how to save, they know how to endure, they know how to keep showing up. What they do not know is that the rules of the game change in a meaningful way at 59 and a half. They keep playing the old game because nobody ever sat them down and explained that the board itself has changed. I want to explain that change in plain English, not because I think everyone should quit working the day they hit 59 and a half. That would be foolish advice. I am not interested in slogans. I am interested in structure. I am interested in helping you see the mechanism that sits underneath the emotion. Because when the mechanism becomes visible, fear gets smaller and choice gets larger. Before 59 and a half, retirement money often feels like museum money. It is yours, but you are not supposed to touch it. You can see it behind the glass. But if you reach in too early, there is a good chance you will pay ordinary income tax and an additional 10% penalty unless you qualify for an exception. That alone keeps many people mentally trapped. They treat their retirement accounts as if the money is real in theory but unavailable in practice. Then you reach 59 and a half, and for most retirement accounts that extra 10% early withdrawal penalty disappears. The glass does not disappear entirely. Taxes still matter. Discipline still matters. Good judgment matters more than ever. But the money stops being a locked relic and starts becoming an instrument. That is a profound shift. A great many people think the magic of retirement is tied to 65 because that is the Medicare age, or to 62 because that is the earliest Social Security claiming age, or to some round account balance because round numbers feel emotionally satisfying. In reality, 59 and a half deserves far more respect than it gets, because that is the age when your retirement accounts begin to move from being future promises to present tools. And once a tool becomes available, the central question changes. The question is not, should I raid my accounts? The question is, can I now use my own capital more intelligently than I am using my own time? That is the right question. Most workers make one giant conceptual error. They assume retirement income has to resemble paycheck income. They think that if they were earning $120,000 from a job, then leaving that job means they somehow need $120,000 of retirement distributions to replace it. That is not how the arithmetic works, and it is certainly not how intelligent capital allocation works. While you are working, your income usually comes through one rigid pipe. Salary arrives on schedule. Payroll taxes hit on schedule. Withholding hits on schedule. Benefits are bundled into the package, whether you like the trade-offs or not. You live inside a fairly inflexible machine. When you stop depending on a full-time paycheck, your income can become far more flexible than most people imagine. You might draw a portion from a traditional IRA, you might take nothing from it and instead use cash reserves for a while, you might sell appreciated assets in a taxable account in a measured way, you might use Roth money strategically, you might delay Social Security, a spouse might still work part. A small pension might cover a meaningful slice of essential costs. The point is not that every household has the same levers. The point is that after 59 and a half, many households suddenly have enough levers to stop living, like there is only one. I often tell people to imagine three faucets sitting over the same sink. One faucet is tax, deferred money. That is the money in traditional retirement accounts. One faucet is tax-free money. That is typically your Roth money. One faucet is taxable money. That is your brokerage account, bank cash, CDs, money market funds, and other regular assets. When you are living on a paycheck, the faucet is mostly chosen for you. When you move into the years after 59 and a half, you begin choosing which faucet opens, how far it opens, and in what order. That is not a small advantage. That is control, and control properly used is worth a great deal of money over a retirement that may last 25 or 30 years. This is where many people make their second mistake. They look at retirement as a simple finish line, work until a date. Stop on that date, claim this benefit on that date, take withdrawals on that date. That is not how an intelligent person should look at it. Retirement, if you understand it properly, is not a date. It is a sequence. And one of the most valuable sequences in modern retirement planning is the window that can open between 59 and a half and your required minimum distribution age. Under current rules, many people now do not have to begin required minimum distributions until age 73, and for people born in 1960 or later, that age rises to 75. Think about what that means. A person who reaches 59 and a half may have more than a decade in which they can access retirement money without the additional early withdrawal penalty. yet still are not being forced by the government to pull out large taxable distributions on a preset schedule. That is not a gap. That is a planning window. And it is one of the most underused planning windows I see. Why is it so valuable? Because once full-time wages fall away or shrink, many households enter a period where taxable income can temporarily drop. That lower income period can be used intelligently. You may choose to realize some income at lower tax brackets. You may convert pieces of traditional IRA money into a Roth over time instead of waiting until required distributions and Social Security stack on top of each other later. You may reduce the eventual size of forced distributions that would otherwise arrive in your 70s when you are less interested in paperwork and more vulnerable to ugly tax surprises. In plain terms, you are trying to do two things at once. You are trying to buy back time now, and you are trying to avoid building a tax bomb for later. Those two goals are not in conflict, done properly. They reinforce each other. Now let me show you where people lose the plot. They assume that working longer automatically makes retirement safer. That sounds sensible, more years of saving. More contributions, more employer matches, more distance from uncertainty. But arithmetic in retirement is not one-dimensional. More money is not the only variable. Timing matters, tax structure matters, health matters, energy matters, optionality matters. A person who keeps earning a strong, full-time salary deep into their 60s may indeed accumulate more assets, but that same person may also burn through the exact low-tax years that could have been used to reshape the balance sheet intelligently. They may postpone Roth conversions until later years when Social Security is already active and required minimum distributions are beginning to bite. They may push themselves into higher taxable income in their 70s than they ever needed to have. They may end up paying higher Medicare premiums because they allowed too much income to stack up in the wrong years. They may succeed in growing the pile only to discover they gave away an unnecessary share of it to taxes, premiums, and delay. That is not prudence. That is often unexamined inertia. Inertia is one of the most expensive forces in personal finance. People think they are making a careful decision when they say, "I'll just work 3 more years." Sometimes they are. Often they are simply extending the last decision because it feels less frightening than making a new one. I understand the psychology. Salary is familiar. Employer health insurance is familiar. The monthly rhythm is familiar. Even the irritation is familiar. Human beings will tolerate a surprising amount of dissatisfaction if dissatisfaction comes packaged as certainty, but there is a hidden price attached to that certainty. One hidden price is tax opportunity. Another is the shrinking value of healthy time. Early 60s time is not the same as mid-70s time. Anyone pretending otherwise is not respecting reality. There are trips you can take at 62 that are harder at 76. There are grandchildren you can chase more easily at 61 than at 74. There are projects you can still attack with force in your early 60s that will feel heavier later. Even if you remain fortunate enough to be in good health, people make spreadsheets for money and none for vitality. That is a mistake. I am a great believer in calculation, but good calculation requires you to count the things that are actually scarce, and healthy years are scarce. A great many people do not need another 3 years of gross income. They need another 3 years of honest planning. That is a completely different problem. Let me make this practical. Suppose a household has spent decades associating safety with salary. They are used to seeing $150,000 of combined earned income, and they imagine retirement must somehow reproduce that same figure. But after they examine payroll taxes, commuting, retirement contributions, work clothing, meals, supporting adult children a little less, and the simple fact that saving for retirement is no longer required when you are already retired, they discover their actual annual spending target is much lower than their former gross pay. That realization alone has liberated many people. A household may discover that what felt like a $150,000 life was really a $90,000 spending life with a large amount of friction wrapped around it. Once that happens, the problem changes from how do we replace a large salary to how do we fund a manageable spending number tax efficiently. That second problem is much easier to solve. This is where the idea of enough needs to be repaired. Most people want enough to be a single number, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 20, 5 times expenses, 30 times expenses. They want a number because numbers feel like certainty. But retirement is not secured by a number alone. It is secured by a system. A couple with $1.5 million and a clear withdrawal plan, a smart tax sequence, a good understanding of Social Security timing, manageable healthcare assumptions, and modest flexibility in spending may be financially stronger than a couple with $4 million and no discipline, no distribution plan, no tax design, and no shared vision of how they will actually live. I have seen plenty of people with large balances who are emotionally broke because they have no framework. Clarity is underrated because it is not glamorous. Yet clarity is what turns a pile of assets into a stream of usable life. That is why I do not like vague retirement dreams. Vague dreams create vague plans, and vague plans create unnecessary fear. If you want to know whether work can become optional around 59 and a half, you need sharper questions. What does your life actually cost? Not what it used to cost at the peak of your obligations, not what your neighbor spends, not what some commercial told you retirement should look like. What does your life cost if you strip it down to truth? What portion of that cost is essential? What portion is adjustable? What assets can cover the next 2 years without forcing you to sell growth investments at a bad time? How much traditional retirement money could you draw or convert while remaining in a tax bracket you can live with? What happens if one spouse keeps earning something part-time for 3 years? What happens if Social Security begins at 62, at full retirement age at 70? What happens to health insurance costs if earned income drops? These are not academic questions. These are operational questions. They determine whether your balance sheet serves you or merely impresses you. Now let us talk about the fear that tends to overpower all the others before 65 health insurance for many Americans. That is the emotional wall. They can imagine living without the office. They can imagine changing routines. They can imagine spending from investments, but they cannot imagine being exposed to healthcare costs before Medicare begins. I do not dismiss that fear. Healthcare is not a footnote. It is a major planning variable, but it is still a variable, not a permanent veto. If you leave full-time work before 65, you may use an Affordable Care Act marketplace plan, Colorado BRA for a period, a spouse, S coverage, or another bridge strategy, depending on your situation. Costs can be meaningful. In some households, they will be painfully meaningful, but those costs do not exist in isolation. Premium subsidies may improve when taxable income declines. A household that is no longer earning full-time wages may qualify for a very different healthcare cost structure than they feared while mentally pricing insurance from a working income perspective. Again, structure matters. A person who continues earning a large salary may feel secure because the employer is paying part of the premium. Meanwhile, that same salary may be crowding out planning opportunities elsewhere. Another person who steps away from full-time work may face an explicit insurance bill. But by lowering income and redesigning withdrawals may create a broader tax result. That is entirely manageable. The right question is not, is health insurance expensive? Of course it can be. The right question is, what is the total after-tax cost of each path when I model healthcare taxes, withdrawals, and time together? Most people never run that full comparison. They compare one visible line item against a fantasy. Then they keep working by default. I would rather you compare reality against reality. Another place where people make poor decisions is debt. You cannot talk honestly about work optionality if your monthly obligations are still built like a working-age machine. High-interest debt is a thief. It steals flexibility first, and money second. Credit card balances, personal loans, sloppy cash flow habits, and large recurring commitments can make a financially strong household behave like a fragile one. That does not mean every mortgage must be eliminated before anyone can reduce work. Life is more nuanced than that. Some people are perfectly comfortable carrying a low-rate mortgage into retirement. Others sleep better with the house paid off. I do not worship either approach. I care about whether the obligation fits the system. If you have expensive debt and substantial retirement assets, the years after 59 and a half may create options. In some cases, a carefully planned withdrawal that kills destructive debt can improve the household more than another year of dutiful saving. In other cases, the tax cost of that move is too high, and the better answer is disciplined cash flow. The point is not that one answer fits all. The point is that the answer becomes available to be analyzed once the account is no longer mentally sealed shut. There is another transition I want you to notice because it is the one that separates people who drift into retirement from people who command it. At some point, if you are doing this properly, you stop thinking of yourself primarily as an employee and start thinking of yourself as the chief capital allocator of your household. That is an identity shift. When you are in your 30s and 40s, your dominant economic task is often labor, earn, save, build, endure, keep climbing, keep accumulating. The system rewards persistence. When you move into the years after 59 and a half, especially if you have built meaningful assets, your dominant economic task begins to change. It becomes allocation, sequencing, tax design, risk management, time design, cash flow architecture. In other words, you are no longer simply selling hours. You are orchestrating a private financial system. Many people never make that psychological shift, and because they never make it, they keep demanding wage income from a stage of life where intelligent capital management could do a better job. I want to be very clear. This does not mean you must stop working. Plenty of people are happiest when they continue. Some love their craft. Some enjoy the community. Some want the margin of additional safety. Some are solving for purpose as much as profit. But if you continue, let it be a deliberate choice, not a reflex. The happiest late career transitions I see are rarely all or nothing. They are redesigns. A person leaves a draining role and keeps consulting 10 hours a week. A couple discovers one spouse can step away while the other continues in a lighter role. Someone stops managing people and starts doing only the small part of the work they still enjoy. Someone moves from 5 days to 3. Someone takes 6 months off, then returns on completely different terms because desperation is gone. That is the real value of a strong balance sheet, not simply the right to stop, the right to negotiate. When people finally calculate how much income they truly need from investments after counting cash reserves, part-time earnings, a spouse's income, future Social Security, and a more realistic spending number, they are often shocked by how modest the gap really is. And once the gap is visible, fear begins to lose its authority. Now, let me give you the operating blueprint I would use if I were sitting at the kitchen table with you. First, I would force the spending number into the light, not an estimate pulled from memory. Real bank statements, real credit card statements, 12 months if possible. I would separate core spending from elective spending, housing, food, utilities, insurance, taxes, transportation, and healthcare are one category. Travel, gifts, entertainment, supporting grown children beyond what is necessary, hobby inflation, and lifestyle drift belong in another. You cannot design freedom around a fictional expense number. Then I would map the household into time buckets. I want near-term liquidity for the next 1 to 3 years. That can be cash, short-term reserves, instruments that are not volatile when I need them. I want a middle bucket that can handle the next several years with reasonable stability, and I want a long duration growth bucket that remains invested because retirement can be long and inflation does not retire when you do. This is not because bucket labels are magical, it is because time matching reduces panic. Panic is what causes people to sell good assets for bad reasons. Then I would lay the tax window over the balance sheet. How many years exist between the end of full-time wages and required minimum distributions? How much room is available in lower brackets? What size Roth conversion could be tolerated without creating unnecessary spillover into higher taxes or healthcare complications? How should taxable assets, traditional accounts, and Roth accounts be sequenced so that later life does not become a forced march of unwanted taxable income? That is where a good planner or solid modeling software can earn its fee. Not by predicting the market, by clarifying trade-offs. Then I would examine Social Security with seriousness. Too many people treat Social Security like an afterthought or a political argument. It is neither for many households. It is an inflation, adjusted lifetime income stream. And the timing of that stream matters. Claiming early can reduce the monthly amount. Delaying beyond full retirement age increases the benefit. Up to age 70, the right answer depends on health, other assets, spousal dynamics, longevity assumptions, tax coordination, and risk tolerance. But whatever you decide, do not decide lazily. The choice compounds over time. Then I would clean up the balance sheet, not cosmetically, functionally. What debts meaningfully reduce flexibility? Which obligations are genuinely necessary and which were simply inherited from a high-income working life? Could the house be simplified later? Is there a second car that no longer makes sense? Are there subscriptions, habits, recurring family subsidies, or status expenses that survive only because the paycheck kept them invisible? Retirement problems are often spending design problems wearing investment language. Then I would do something many financial plans ignore. I would design the life, not just the ledger. What will Tuesday feel like without the old routine? Who will you see? What work, even unpaid work, will still make you feel useful? What part of yourself has been postponed behind the phrase someday? When things settle down, what does a good week look like? In ordinary life, not vacation life. You do not need a cinematic answer, but you do need an answer. Money is not the destination. Money is the permission structure. Without a vision, people cling to work because work at least tells them who they are and what day it is. With a vision, the finances begin to organize themselves around a purpose. Let me show you how this tends to work in the real world. I once studied a household that had done nearly everything right. They had saved responsibly for years. They were not flashy people. They had a manageable mortgage, no reckless debt, and retirement balances that would make many planners nod approvingly, yet they still felt trapped. Why? Because the husband had built his whole identity around one more year of work. He kept repeating the same sentence, "I just want to feel completely safe." That sentence sounds prudent. It can also be a bottomless pit. There is no such thing as completely safe. There is only safe enough, intelligently structured. When they finally laid out the numbers honestly, several things became obvious. Their actual spending was lower than they imagined. Their payroll era assumptions were inflating the income target. A part-time income stream for a few years would cover more than they thought. The years before full Social Security and before required minimum distributions gave them room to make measured withdrawals and selective Roth moves. Healthcare before Medicare was not cheap, but it was manageable inside the total plan. Most important of all, the value of 3 earlier healthy years was much larger than the extra money those years of full-time work were likely to create after tax. The breakthrough was not mathematical genius. It was organized honesty. That is what a good retirement decision usually is. Organized honesty about spending. Organized honesty about taxes. Organized honesty about energy. Organized honesty about what enough means. There is a final point I want to leave with you because it matters more than all the formulas. The purpose of this conversation is not to persuade you to quit your job. The purpose is to stop you from accidentally donating years of your life to a structure you no longer need, simply because you never learned the new rules. If you love your work, wonderful. Continue from strength, not fear. If you want to keep earning because the mission matters to you, excellent. Earn because you choose to, not because a mental model from age 40 is still running your life at age 60. But if some part of you has been whispering that the full-time version of this arrangement no longer fits, then do not silence that whisper until you have actually run the numbers the right way. 59.5 is not a finish line. It is a control point. It is the age when many people stop being prisoners of accumulation and start becoming architects of distribution. It is the moment when your money can begin doing a job your body has been doing for decades. It is the point where retirement planning stops being a fantasy and starts becoming a design problem. And that design problem, handled correctly, can buy back a remarkable amount of life. I would urge you to test yourself with one hard question tonight. Not a vague question, a hard one. If I stepped away from full-time work at 59.5 or 60 or 62, how much money would I truly need each year from my investments after accounting for realistic spending, taxes, healthcare, part-time income, if any, future Social Security, and the assets I already control? Write down a real number, then ask the second question, the one most people spend years avoiding. If my healthiest remaining years are arriving now, what exactly am I still selling them for? If the answer is dignity, purpose, contribution, craft, or joy, then you have something worth protecting. If the answer is habit, fear, or a tax-inefficient misunderstanding of what your own balance sheet can already do, then the problem is not retirement. The problem is that nobody ever handed you the new map. Now you have the map, use it with care. Use it with intelligence. Use it before the window closes, because the goal is not to work until you are too tired to live. The goal is to build enough judgment, enough structure, and enough courage that work becomes a choice before life becomes a limitation.